Hello, and welcome back to Dark Tower YouTube, where we're doing a deep psychological dive into the magic, the mystery, and the metaphysics of Stephen King's magnum opus, The Dark Tower. Welcome. This is a special episode on the Gunslinger for my Tower Junkie friends. So this is a Tower Junkies only episode. And by Tower Junkie, I mean somebody who has finished the series and who has come back for more. You love it, you can't get enough, you're on your second read or fifth or 55th, and you're just learning something new every single time because that's how this series works, and it consumes your entire life. You're my people. Hello. If that's not you, please turn this off because I'm about to spoil the entire series for you. So go finish book 7 at least, but preferably all 8 of the books, and then come back and we will blow your mind with everything that you missed the first time around. So we're going to be looking at the Gunslinger, and I've just pulled things out that jump out and hit different the second time that you read it, or the 5th or 55th. I can't catch them all. Y'all are doing this too, so tell me what I missed and tell me what hit you differently. And I don't have answers for many of these things, but I do have questions on subsequent readings that I think are thought-provoking and would love to hear your opinion. We have theories. We don't have solid answers for many of these things, but that's the fun of it. So please let me know in the comments what you think about all of this. Let's start with the idea of the subtitle. So Stephen King just writes this right on the first page. Resumption. And when I read it for the second time, I was like, oh my God, he's just telling us in the beginning what is happening here. This is a resumption of what? Of Roland's cycle. And it's almost like too big of a spoiler once you know it. But did anybody catch that the first time and read this and give it any thought whatsoever and say, what are we resuming? What does that mean? Or did you just skip by it and not give it another thought for the entire series like I did? The next thing I want to look at is this excerpt. And I talk about this in the main episode of The Gunslinger, and I read the whole thing. But we're going to pick it apart. Let's really think about this as Tower Junkies coming back. Remember, this was not in the original Gunslinger. Stephen King, when he revised this in 2003, picked an excerpt to put at the beginning of the Gunslinger to talk about the entire series as a whole. And I don't think there's any better excerpt that he could have chosen because it hits everything that we're talking about in this entire series. So let's kind of move through it. We have the stone, the leaf, the unfound door, and Eddie directly refers to this imagery in perhaps book 5, I can't remember, but he's talking about Thomas Wolfe, Look Homeward Angel, and he's thinking, it's almost like that, almost like the words in that book, except we're talking about a rose instead of a leaf, and we get that meta-literary thing happening with Eddie referring directly to this passage. Of all the forgotten faces, Roland is trying to forget all of these forgotten faces. He, in the Gunslinger, is just like, why am I thinking of the past so much? We're told by King over and over again, he's not a man to think of his past, and yet that's all he's doing. And we know that these forgotten faces are showing up again. He's getting different versions of the same types of people in his life to get a second chance, to do it better, to do it right, to fix things that he messed up the first time. Naked and alone, we came into exile in her dark womb. We did not know our mother's face. And in this series, we get so much of the face of your father. The father has all the power. The father passes down the guns, and the mothers are just pushed off to the side, not important at all in the lives of these young children and then gunslingers in training. But we did not know our mother's face. And how important is that into being born again, having this potential at life, a chance at moving out of one thing and into something different. And King goes there with Susanna in book 5, 6, and 7, but really book 6, Song of Susanna, and really starts to dive into this idea of mother archetype and imagery with Susanna and Mia. And in The Wind Through the Keyhole, I think really ties the bow on Roland's relationship with his mother. King wrote that book, The Wind Through the Keyhole, and people are saying like, oh, you don't need to read it. It's a nice little fairy tale. And I'm like, oh no. If you really look at the overarching themes of the Dark Tower and the importance that's placed on women, mothers, feminine qualities, it's everything. Susanna is the only one out of all of our beloved characters who survives this loop. Why? She happens to be the only woman. Is that a coincidence? No. Nope. And I think King realized that Roland's relationship with his mother was incomplete in those first 7 books. And I bet it kept him awake at night. The Song of the Turtle was just like, you gotta put a bow on that because it's important. And you know it, and you knew it, but you missed it a little bit. And throughout The Wind Through the Keyhole, the emphasis on the mother figures is big. And then we get that beautiful ending to that story, which makes me cry, but we'll talk about that when we talk about that. Anyway, I think it's a big deal, and I think we're going to be paying attention to masculine and feminine archetypes throughout the Dark Tower series. Thomas Wolfe talks about the unspeakable and incommunicable prison of this earth, and of course Roland is a prisoner of this earth, of this cycle, and he has a problem with communication. So this incommunicable idea is strong with Roland. That's one of his major flaws, which we will be talking about a little more, probably a lot more. Which of us has known his brother? Which of us has looked into his father's heart? So there's the father idea, the masculine idea, and how well does Roland actually know his father? Not that well. So for all of the emphasis that's placed on the patriarchy in this society, the love between them is not overwhelming. The knowledge, the sharing is not really there in a way that we can see, and we see Roland carrying that trait along with him. And again, that communication messes him up. Which of us has not remained forever prison pent? Well, there's the whole problem of this story, of Roland's problem in this story. Which of us is not forever a stranger and alone? So sad. It's so sad. And then this passage ends, "O lost, and by the wind grieved ghost, come back again." I mean, it's just so perfect. So perfect. And that idea of Brown in The Gunslinger saying, "Is thee alive or dead?" And that idea of Keft as that ghost that I talk about in the main episode for The Gunslinger. It's all here. It's all here. I love it so much. So there's that. So read that again, really think about it, or maybe you're sick of it. That's okay. We're gonna move on. Okay, let's move on to the very beginning of The Gunslinger, where we know he is being kind of dropped in like the video game where, you know, you die, game over, and your character like ploop, like plops back in to the same place that you started the last time. And we get a good idea that this is the place, because we have that mirroring of the beginning of The Gunslinger and the end of the Dark Tower Book 7, where it is the same feeling-ish in the desert, the same place we think in the desert after he's left Brown for a few weeks before he's met Jake. This is the point where he's dropped into that video game. Why? A lot of big questions on that one. But we're told in the Gunslinger, the revised edition, that he has this dizziness and he forgets so quickly that it was walking through that door in the Dark Tower. And he's saying, why should that dizziness remind me of my friends who were lost so long ago? Why am I thinking of the horn? These are all, I think, just huge clues from King about what needs to be fixed. You're thinking about those things because that's what you need to fix, Roland. Love for your friends, pausing and picking up that horn for 3 seconds. Saving Jake. We're right at the point, right before he meets Jake is where we're kind of dropped in. Because remember, chapter 1 in the Gunslinger, we get Roland having this dizzy spell, thinking of his past. And then the rest of chapter 1 is a flashback. And then immediately in chapter 2, Roland is approaching the way station. So I don't think the time between when we meet Roland and the way station, maybe a day or two. He's already in pretty rough straits when we meet him in the first pages of the Gunslinger. So it's right before Jake. I feel like that points pretty obviously to, this is the thing, Roland, here is your second chance. Here is your chance to fix what was broken. Makes sense to me. What do you think? And let's talk next about, I mentioned the masculine and the feminine archetype. So just kind of a reminder, a refresher. These are big deals in a lot of literature, in a lot of spiritual and religious traditions. We have this idea of masculine energy, a masculine archetype, which is somebody that is strong, so strength, action-oriented. There's rational thinking and structure and logic, and we're risk-taking, and we're assertive and confident, and we're fighting the good fight. And it's very externally action-focused. Versus the feminine archetype, that feminine energy is intuitive. It is empathic. It is nurturing, loving, caring. It is humble. It is imaginative and receptive. We're in a flow state. We're not being rational. We're just receiving what's coming to us. And it's a very internally focused way of being. Everybody has elements of both, masculine and feminine energies. This has nothing to do with gender. And ideally, they're in balance. Ideally, we have some of each, and we know when to use which ones. Roland, I would argue, is this very strong masculine archetype, and that's why we love him. And also, he's a bit unbalanced. It's not his fault. In the Gunslinger, we learn about how the feminine is just stripped from these gunslingers' lives, starting at a very early age, when they're not allowed to have their mothers put them to bed or read to them or sing to them. That's only allowed during the daytime, never at night. And then he has to move out of the house that his mother lives in. So just stripping those things away from him. So it's not his fault. He's a product of his environment, but he continues to carry that forward to his detriment. The feminine, though, in the Gunslinger, comes back in immediately. In chapter 1 in the Gunslinger, we have Allie. And Roland stays in Tull. Why? Why does he stay there? There's no reason for him to stay there except he loves this woman or has feelings for this woman, or it's awakened this thing in him that's missing. And so for him just to be in the presence of a woman who cares for him, even if she doesn't love him, even if they're not going to be together and get married, I think if we're looking at those overarching themes throughout the story, that makes sense to me. Do you have any other reasons why he's staying in Tull? Why doesn't he just get what he needs and move on? Finish chasing the man in black? Why pause there? In chapter 2, King is bringing Roland's mother in strong, and Roland is dying, and he's has this nursery rhyme song that his mother used to sing him, just looping in his head. That baby bunting song. And it's this kind of representation for him of like innocence, pure love, comfort, all of those nurturing feminine things that he's been missing. And remember that chassit, chissit, chassit, whatever, becomes the password to his salvation in book 7. I think chassit is the password. So just kind of a nice you know what I mean, reverting back to chapter 1. I can't think of the word, and I'm not editing this, so there you go. You know what I'm talking about. So we just have this mirroring, let's say that, of that song in chapter 1 and in chapter 7. And then in chapter 3 in the Gunslinger, we get hit hard with the Susan stick. And Susan is all over chapter 3 and kind of introduced to her right before we're introduced to Jake. Or as we're introduced to Jake, I should say, where there's this parallel drawn between Jake and Susan. And it's very strong. And if we missed it, King kind of throws it at us by saying Roland is humming Careless Love under his breath at the way station as he's meeting Jake. And that's the song, of course, that both of those characters were singing in Wizard and Glass. So again, a lot of feminine energy coming in chapter 3 in the form of Susan, and drawing that comparison, strong comparison between Susan and Jake. And I call Jake Susan 2.0. And this is his chance at salvation. So he messed up with Susan. Again, not super his fault. The grapefruit cast its spell on him and lied to him, and not fantastic. And I don't know, why didn't he go back to the grapefruit? Why does he go back to before Jake? I think he needed to encounter the grapefruit. That was just part of the quest. They needed to get that out of the hands of the bad guys, and once you get that orb, you will be enchanted by it. And that's, I don't know if we could have redone it that way. This is a more interesting story anyway. But so so back to the Gunslinger in chapter 4 and 5. So, you know, we have this introduction, Allie, his mom, Susan, and then chapter 4 and 5, Roland is really struggling, fiercely struggling with these feminine aspects of himself, of love for Jake, of caring, wanting to protect him, empathizing with his plight, fighting against that bigger, more masculine idea of like, it's not practical to be with this kid, and he's more used to being alone, and the kid is obviously some kind of you know the drill. So he's really fighting with that, and then ultimately he lets that feminine part of himself go when he lets Jake drop, and that's bad. That's not good. We see him struggling with this imbalance throughout the story of the Gunslinger. Remember, it's so weird when he's meeting Brown and he's like, I want to tell you the story of Tull, but I can't. He just is dragging his feet and procrastinating and waiting for Brown to ask him, and then I gotta go pee, and it's so weird. But when you think about it in this framework, it makes sense. It's just that duality of he feels bad about it, you know, and Brown's like, there, do you feel better? Roland's like, why would I feel bad about that? Because you just murdered an entire town, including women and children. And part of you does feel bad about that. That more feminine part of your soul, that softer part of yourself, Roland. And we see it, but that's one example of this struggle. At the first mention of the Dark Tower, we also see that conflict within him very strong when we're introduced to the Dark Tower. And I think I mentioned this in the original For Everybody Gunslinger chapter 2 video, where he's just like talking about his mom and this love, and then the Dark Tower is this awful thing, and then it's bookended again by this love for his mother, and that conflict between those two things. So really, it's there. I think it's there, and I think it's very on purpose, and it's not something that I really paid attention to the first time I read it. All right. On that note, I mentioned a feminine aspect of imagination. And that's a very receptive feminine thing, traditionally in literature, religion, spirituality. And we're told over and over again by King that Roland has little imagination. If you go back and read The Gunslinger, like highlight every time King says that. It's a handful of times. I don't remember. As we're reading through the next few books, I'm going to be looking for that. But we're given that a few times. And like I said, when an author tells you something more than once, pay attention. It's important. And the first time he told you it was important, but you might have just not been really looking or thinking about it. So if you see it again, stop. This is key. And if you see it more than twice, it is huge. It is hugely important to this character or the theme or the book as a whole. And in this particular instance, I think it's huge to the book as a whole. Roland's lack of imagination is what is preventing him from moving past this cycle. So I pulled out one of the times we're told that. And King writes, "The gunslinger was not a man to dwell on the past, only a shadowy conception of the future and of his own emotional makeup saved him from being a man without imagination, a dangerous dullard." So again, that's just one example. There are quite a few in this book. If he can imagine himself differently, everything's different. If you can imagine things differently, you're thinking about it differently. You're opening up possibilities. And now you have options. Roland just keeps slamming that door shut. It has always been this way. It will always be this way. And we're told that again and again by King in The Gunslinger. But there are two times when we get a glimpse like, you could do this, Roland. Use your imagination to allow it to be different. So the first time that we see that is when he is wanting to tell Jake about what happened with the Oracle in the stone circle. And as he's heading back to Jake, he's like overwhelmed with this feeling of like, I want to share this with him. So that feminine aspect of connection and empathy and like, this is important to both of us. And so he has that thought in his imagination and then just shuts it down. And he's like, what am I, insane? Like, no, dude, that's what you need to do. And then, of course, the second time in the book that I caught anyway is where he is directly imagining his life with Jake as a gunslinger. Like right before the tragedy happens, he's like, like I could stop. I could just turn around with this boy. And like the Oracle said, there is a place for people like us, and I could train him, and he's so perfect. He already is a gunslinger, and Roland knows it. We could have this life together and then go together to fight the man in black. This is big imaginative thinking that we do not see from Roland otherwise. As King tells us, he's lacking this imagination. But here, that's what he needs to do. That's what he needs to do. And he shuts it down. And that more masculine, rational part of him is like, absolutely not. You can't do that. That's not realistic. It's not practical. We're so close. You would die anyway, under the mountain, not possible. So he just reverts back to that lack of imagination. It has to be this way. It always ends on the killing fields. So pay attention to that idea of imagination in this book. And of course, in the Dark Tower series, we have this overarching idea about creativity and story writing and storytelling and just how big that is to this whole journey. It's huge. And so imagination, of course, is key to word slingers like Stephen King. So we're going to watch for that. I want to talk about Brown. And Brown is so interesting. And the things that he says, once you know what's up, should give you some pause. So Brown meeting Roland, is thee alive or dead? a ghost like we hear in that Thomas Wolfe excerpt? Does Brown say that to everybody that he meets? Or just Roland? Because Brown is somehow aware of this cycle. Remember, he is a holy man. He is one of the Mani, or at least his wife was. We're not directly told that he was Mani, but he must be, or at least he was living with them. So does he know what's going on? Overtly know what's going on? Or is he just kind of peripherally aware of it because of his spiritual leanings? I don't know, but I'm asking the question. What do you think about that question? Or is it just he sees something in Roland that strikes him as he knows that something is up with this man that he meets? And maybe he is a ghost. I don't know. Then, when they're eating dinner, Roland says, "Do you believe in an afterlife?" So, I guess it makes sense for Roland to know that Brown is one of these holy men. And so Roland's kind of curious about it. So that question, that could come up at dinner if you're having dinner with a holy man of God. What do you think about the afterlife? That's a cool dinner conversation. But the way that Brown answers, I think this is it. And we're like, oh, haha, good one, Brown. Wait, is that a joke? Are you serious? Do you know what's up? Is this the afterlife? And it is. Life after life. It is an afterlife for Roland. Does Brown know this in some way? I don't know. Food for thought. Let's move into the idea of déjà vu and also intuition, which get mixed up in this entire series. But we start to get flashes of this in the Gunslinger, where Roland is in the church, Sylvia Pittston's church, and she is giving her wild sermon. And King writes, "My dear little brothers and sisters in Christ." It was a haunting line. For a moment, the Gunslinger felt mixed feelings of nostalgia and fear, stitched in with an eerie feeling of déjà vu. And he thought, I dreamed this. Or, I was here before. If so, where? When? Not Mayhe's. No, not there. He shook the feeling off. But we learn that Pittston was in Mayhe's, in Wizard and Glass. So, he's remembering the future that hasn't happened yet in this cycle. Later, in this same sermon, Pittston is preaching again, and King writes, "It is him that stands behind every fleshly pleasure, him who made the machines with Lamarck stamped on them, him, the interloper." Lamarck, the Gunslinger thought. Or maybe she said Lamarck. The word had some vague resonance for him, but nothing he could put his finger on. Nonetheless, he filed it away in his memory, which was capacious. So again, remembering into the future where Lamarck becomes a big part of the plot. And we have, jumping around a little bit here in my notes, but I think it makes sense to talk about his intuition here. Bear with me. Oh, I can't find it. Oh, here it is. Okay. So we're going to think about intuition when we see that word, because Deja vu is where you're kind of like, this has happened before. And then intuition is like, I know what to do, or I know something to be true. And I think King is using them in a similar way to get us to see the cycle. So when we hear about intuition, how do the characters know the things that they know? And this is not just Roland, but when we get to book 5, I believe, there's a passage, and we'll get to that when we get to that, but where Eddie's on the horse and he's like, I've never ridden a horse in my life, and yet I know exactly what to do. I feel like I've done this before. Is this deja vu? Something like that. Where it's very clear to us who have read the series again, oh, he's in this loop too. Maybe. So there's big controversy and thoughts about, is it the same people every time? Do we get the same characters, the same quartet in subsequent cycles? And I think that is a big key clue to the answer yes. Eddie knows how to ride a horse because he's done it again and again and again as he's cycled through as well. We have, here's some examples, it's all over this book, but here's some examples where Roland is with Jake at the way station and they're kind of talking about what's going to happen. And King writes, "We stay here tomorrow," the gunslinger said. "But that man you're after, the priest, he's no priest. And don't worry, he'll keep." "How do you know that?" The gunslinger could only shake his head. The intuition was strong in him, but it was not a good intuition. So he doesn't know how he knows that, but he does because he's done it before. Another place where it's this weird intuition feeling we're told about is where they're about to meet the man in black. And King writes, "The gunslinger began to feel the tug of anticipation again, the feeling that it was all finally in his grasp. He'd been through this before, many times, and still he had to fight himself to keep from breaking into an eager trot." He's been through what many times before, Stephen King? The first time you read this, you might just go, oh, I guess he's almost caught the man in black before in his travels, and that's what this means. And maybe it does, but knowing what we know, he has been through this many times before. This thing exactly. Which one did Stephen King mean there? And then there's awful part where he's making this decision as to what he's going to do with Jake, and he decides he's uncoupling from Jake and he's going to sacrifice him and he's going to go through with it, which he still fights with himself after this decision is made. But King writes, "The gunslinger felt a great and unholy thirst in some deep unknown pit of his body, one no draught of water or wine could touch. Worlds trembled. Almost within reach of his fingers, and in some instinctual way, he strove not to be corrupted, knowing in his colder mind that such strife was in vain and always would be. In the end, there was only Ka." So we can bring that idea of Roland's instinct in as well, and we're told that his instinct is what gets him through and what has saved him, and he trusts his instincts. And yet, as we talk about a ton throughout the regular videos of the gunslinger, he doesn't listen to it when it's telling him exactly what he needs to do. So we're told again and again, he's a man of great instinct, and that's how he knows. He gets a thought and he knows to act on it. But when he's getting the right thought about what to do with Jake and how to be a good person, he that's crazy. And it's like, no, it's your instinct, but is that also you remembering what happened before, this deeper part of your soul that knows that this is a cycle, Roland. I don't know. Another mirroring idea is, again, with his instinct, intuition, to tell Jake about the oracle and what the oracle said and what's going to happen and what they should do and become close, connected. And King writes, then he thrust the idea away with horror. He wondered if a part of him, mind or soul, might not be disintegrating. To open one's mind and heart to the command of a child, the idea was insane. But we know that that is exactly what he gets to in book 5. And so the idea of Roland's salvation, redemption, we see him on the path to that throughout this cycle. I think this is cycle 19. I think 20 is the last one. This is my feeling. A lot of people share this theory. And I think there's just so much evidence that kind of supports that we're seeing the second to last, because this is where everything almost changes. And we get to see those internal fights and that path to salvation that Roland is on, and how he changes from book 1 to book 7. It's a big change, but he still dropped the dang kid. So you gotta do it again, friend. You can't drop him. He's gonna not drop him next time. I believe that. But remember I think it's book 5, where he does speak to Jake Dean, I think it's called, where he opens his heart to the command of a child. And, in that book, it's a little manipulative. I don't think it's not great. We'll talk about that when we talk about that, but just the idea is not insane to him anymore is kind of the point. He's doing it by book 5, even if his intentions are a little suspect. Okay, now I messed my notes up and I don't have numbers on the pages, so let's get back to where we were. The killing of Allie in chapter 1 is different in the unrevised and the revised. And I think, there's this whole thing of read the unrevised Gunslinger, read the series, and then go back and read the revised edition. And that's a cool thing to do. And this scene, the little difference in this scene, I think could be pointing us to the slight differences that might be happening every time Roland goes back and repeats this cycle. What happens? Well, the first version of this, let's call that I don't know. Anyway, let's call that the unrevised edition, because that's what it is. So in the unrevised edition, he just kills her. So Sheb comes out and he's like, oh, I don't know if he says anything, and Roland's like, boom. And that's it. He just kills her in cold blood. But in the revised edition, there's more there. And she's talking about 19 and she needs to be put out of her misery. So that's different. And this is a killing out of compassion of some kind. She's asking to be killed. So King changed that. And Roland's still a cold-blooded killer, but that love that he had for Allie is showing up in a different way than it did in the unrevised edition, don't you think? Also, this is not different between unrevised and revised, but cutting Nort down off the roof when they crucified Nort, he didn't have to do that. That is an act of compassion and empathy. And I don't know if I'd call it love, but there's no reason he had to do that. He's leaving. He doesn't care. This is a dead town. And yet and that is not a fun or easy task, I wouldn't think, but he takes the time to do it. So I feel like that also might be a different change between the cycles. All right, so we're talking about chapter 2 and this poem that King wrote. All the things we know will change, and all those things remain the same. I think that's the key to the whole book right there. So he gets these second chances with different people. All the things we know will change. So they're completely different people, but all these things remain the same. It's the same loop. It's the same lesson. You got to do the same thing, Roland, every time. You're not doing it. Now's another chance to do it. Again, is it the same people? maybe. But things are a little different every time, but also the same. So I think that's a really big key to what is happening. I also think it's funny where the plains in Spain fall in the rain. It's the last line of that poem. And of course, Roland is like, I don't know what that means. But he's going to find out in the beginning of book 1 what a plain is. So that's cute, I think. I don't know if that's on purpose, but I enjoy that. And we talked a little bit already about Jake, I think is Susan 2.0, his second chance at salvation here, or however many, 19th chance at salvation. And then Eddie is set up as Jake 2.0. So we have Susan fail. We have Jake directly compared to Susan multiple times fail. And then at the beginning of book 2, as we'll get to when we get to it, there's a lot of parallels between Roland in the desert leading up to Jake and Roland on the beach leading up to Eddie. So another chance at salvation. It really comes down to, this is what I think. Let me know what you think. But I think we can come down to 2 main points. What does Roland need to do? Number 1, he needs to stop sacrificing love for the tower. That is getting him into trouble. He needs to put love above the tower. And then 2, which is part of love, it could all be the same thing. He needs to share what's going on with the people that he loves, because that's a major theme that we see throughout, starting with Jake in book 1, where he's like, I'm going to tell him what's going on. No, I can't. That's insane. And then in book 5, all of the secrets that everybody's keeping get them into all kinds of trouble, and the quartet is breaking apart because of this incommunication. Is that a word, incommunication? They need to love each other and express that love to each other through good communication. Don't we all need to do that? We're doing this psychological reading of the Gunslinger, the Dark Tower. We need to love better and share that love more. I think everything comes down to that, including this series, including what Roland needs to do to break the cycle. A good example of this for our lives, these loops, a great example is relationships. I've noticed this. My friends have noticed this. If you're not married to your high school sweetheart and you've had several different romantic partners, did you ever have the thought, like, why do I keep dating the same person? This is a different person, an individual, but they're acting exactly the same. We have the same exact problems that I had with the last one. Why do I always choose men like this? Or why do men like this always show up in my life? Or women, or both. That feels like a very obvious loop for me and for a lot of people. And just like what Roland's going through, for us to kind of recognize that as a loop is step 1, which Roland has not been able to do yet. And then step 2 is, how do we break that? If I had the answer, we would all be a lot happier. And I would probably be rich. But I do think the answer is the same as what we just talked about. Love, and sharing that love. And love for yourself, of course. Roland has a lot of self-hatred that is apparent in the Gunslinger and throughout the rest of the series. But I think the love helps him to heal. And the connection with the women later in the book. So Rosalita and Mrs. Is it Tenenbaum? The Royal Tenenbaums, I might be getting mixed up, but you know who I mean. So these women that come later help him love himself a little bit. So there's your psychology for this lesson, guys. Okay, let's talk about the speaking demon. Go slow past the drawers, Gunslinger. Watch for the Tahin. Which Tahin? What is she talking about? So he sees a Tahin in the Gunslinger. Is that what she meant? But this was all added after in the revised edition. And so I'm wondering if it's watch for Finley Ortega, that Tajín. He's not the one that pulls the trigger. That would be too perfect, I guess. But he is best friends with Pimley Prentice, who does take our dear friend Eddie out. So I wonder about that. And then this idea, while you travel with the boy, the man in black travels with your soul in his pocket. It's such a mystic, mysterious thing to say. And the man in black, the gateway to the tower, it is Roland's soul. He sells his soul for the tower, essentially. He chooses the tower over love, over self-love, over his soul. And Jake is his redemption, his salvation. He needs to not drop Jake. So my question is, he does drop Jake, and now he's not traveling with Jake. So where did his soul go? I think it went down the chasm with Jake, but it's not lost forever. And of course, the rest of the series, he's trying to fix that and regain it. What happens when he travels with Jake again? Is that soul now back in the balance? Is having his soul in the pocket of the man in black such a bad thing? The man in black. Let's talk about him. Because we get a lot of ideas about the man in black in terms of he knows this is a loop. We're told that. The man in black in chapter 5 says, this is not the beginning, but the beginning's end. You would do well to remember that, but you never do. I don't understand. No, you don't. You never did. You never will. You have no imagination. You're blind that way. Well, there's that imagination bit again. Roland does have imagination, though. We see those glimpses of it, and we see it changing how things are playing out as we move through the series. So I think the man in black is wrong here. But he knows it's a loop. And he's telling Roland it's a loop. So his awareness of that loop is something really big to think about. We're almost coming up on an hour here, so I need to kind of think about wrapping it up. But anyway, kind of back to my point, like the man in black having Roland's soul in his pocket when Roland traveled with Jake, is that a terrible thing? Or is it just a very overt signal to the reader that Jake is the key to Roland's soul being saved? The pocket of the man in black, he's the gateway to the tower. So I don't know. You can tell I haven't fully formed that thought, but I do feel like we're like, oh, that's bad. But is it? Because is the man in black so bad? And we see him helping them. And we see him giving them cookies after the fight with the TikTok man. We see him helping them. So like, what's up with him? I think I have to do a separate video about that because it's too much to get into. But anyway, he knows it's a loop. Why does he die so stupidly? Does he die differently? Does he forget? I don't know. We don't know, but very interesting to know that he knows something that Roland doesn't hear. A couple more things I think we have time for. Let's talk about the sacrifice of David mirroring the sacrifice of Oy. So starting the Gunslinger and then ending book 7, Roland has this animal companion that he has a connection to that is his friend. And in book 1, he willingly sacrifices David in pursuit of Walter and the tower. He doesn't know about the tower yet, I guess, but it's a willing sacrifice. By book 7, this is also animal friend that he cares for, that it is sacrificed. Roland is not choosing to do it anymore, though. So I think that's a big difference. This is not a willing sacrifice. And Roland just feels heartbroken at Oy's death. And both animals were told, die pretty gruesome deaths with their spine being snapped. That's announced in each of those poor little animal deaths. So again, that mirroring is very distinct in the way that the animal dies, what we're told about that, and if you think about that mirror imaging, it's there, but Roland is different the second time around. Another mirror from Gunslinger to book 7 is Roland on the rail car telling when the rocks are put out by the slow mutants, and Roland's like, you got to get out, Jake. You got to go and move those rocks. But I can't do it. What am I, a gunslinger? Like, you got to go do it. And Jake does it because he is a resourceful, strong, brave little person. But a very similar scene in book 7 where Roland tells Patrick, you got to go get that rose. You got to go pick that rose. I can't do it. You have to do it. And Patrick refuses. So we have a difference here in smaller children being subservient to Roland's request. And Patrick's like, nope, I'm not doing it. And Roland's like, fine, I'll do it myself. And he does. And good thing Patrick said no, because remember, Roland gets his finger pretty much sliced off by the thorns on that rose that he picks. Now he can't shoot anymore. This is the hand that has been already destroyed, and now it's totally, there's nothing left on that hand. He can't shoot anymore. I mean, he couldn't shoot with it anyway, but now it's like, I don't know. I just feel like it's a very strong symbol of just like how useless his hands are with the guns and the whole thing. It was never about shooting. It was never about shooting anybody. That's not the action that he needs to take to save himself. But it feels like a very strong parallel there. Okay, anything else we want to talk about? Yeah, how about the politics? I would love to hear your thoughts about the politics here, because I don't know what to make of it. We have the people revolting against the Gunslinger Society, which is like this patriarchal, hierarchical society. The way of the gun. And people are like, this sucks. Unless you're one of those rich gunslingers with power and guns, like, you're pretty helpless and just totally subservient to whatever they want to happen. This is not good for us. And now in the figure of the good man, which is an interesting thing to call the leader of the resistance, and directly compare him to JFK. And we get that idea of JFK in book 2 when Odetta is, it's like, I forget who says it, but it's on the radio, I think, America's Last Gunslinger is JFK. So, and we know that King wrote that whole book about saving JFK, which I happen to be rereading at the moment. So what does it all mean? At the least, we're being called to examine our initial impression of our protagonist and the world in which they live. And a lot of times in stories, it's like, oh, like, this is the good guy and this is our protagonist. And obviously he's doing things right, or where he's living, we love it. But there's a lot of discord there that feels like they don't want that. So what do they want? Democracy? Maybe. And the good man, though, we know turns out to be the man in black, or at least affiliated with him. I think it is him, like Farson, I forget now, but is Farson the man in black? Guys, help me out, I forget. But anyway, it's bad. You know, the man in black trying to cause chaos and disruption, and he doesn't really care about politics, I don't think. He's just an agent of chaos in the story in some way. Or is he? Or is he a good guy? Or is he a bad guy? Or does he not give a fuck? Again, we're going to make a separate video all about that. But just to say that the politics, I think, are interesting and kind of signaling to us like maybe this gunslinger thing is not all it's cracked up to be. Maybe the way of the gun is not the way that works for most people. Maybe what these gunslingers are doing, yeah, it can be helpful in some ways, but in other ways it's suppressing an entire population of people and making them feel powerless and helpless. So, art imitating life and all of that. All right, guys, I don't know. Like, these notes are just all over the place now. I think I talked about everything I wanted to talk about. What did you notice on your second go round, 5th, 55th? At some point, I want to read the unrevised next to the revised and look at what's different there and what we can kind of extract from how King was sewing together the entire series with those revisions. They're pretty straightforward, I think. There's not too many of them, but it might be fun. Let me know if you want to do that. Also, if you're still listening to this video and you love the Dark Tower and you love making videos and talking to other people about it, I'm looking for a co-host. I want somebody to talk to about these things. I think it makes for a more interesting show. And so my requirements are you've done some sort of recording and you know about the Dark Tower. You've read it through at least once. And you know what? Even if you didn't, we could work that out. If you're like super into it, you've read a few books and you're like, yes, this is my entire life now. I would consider that. And you have some knowledge about literature, writing, religious, spiritual traditions. You know what this show is about if you've been listening this long and you're here with me now at the end of an hour. You might be my person. So reach out, let me know. You can do that in the comments if you want, or email me at realityremixradio@gmail.com. I would love to hear from you regardless. Anybody can write to me at Reality Remix Radio and let me know what's going on. Okay, I'm going to wrap this up. I loved it. I had a good time. I hope you did too. I can't wait to do more episodes for my Tower Junkie friends. And until that time, until we meet again, may you have long days and pleasant nights, my friends.